Your dog is lying there right now, maybe at your feet, maybe on the couch beside you, maybe watching you with the kind of stillness that no wild animal, not one, has ever learned to aim at a human face. And most of us explain that the same way, because dogs love us, because they were bred for it, because that's just what dogs do. That explanation isn't wrong, but it skips something, because before any of this, before the couch, before the breed, before the word dog existed at all, there was a different animal standing in the dark outside your fire, watching, waiting, and no one planned what happened next. Before we talk about what happened, it's worth staying for a moment in the world where it hadn't happened yet. 12 to 15,000 years ago, the landscape was different in almost every way. Mammoths, cave bears, aurochs, still present in numbers that are hard to imagine now. Human groups were small, mobile, and vulnerable in ways that modern life has made genuinely difficult to feel. And wolves were everywhere. Not the cautious, peripheral wolves that now keep their distance from people. These were apex predators competing directly with humans for the same prey, across the same territory, in the same cold. A band of human hunters and a pack of wolves were not neighbors in any comfortable sense. They were direct competitors, sometimes threats to each other. The fire at the center of camp wasn't decorative. It was a boundary. The light marked the edge of relative safety, and the darkness beyond it was something people understood, in a felt and practical way, as genuinely dangerous. This is the world in which the dog became possible, not as a charming addition to human life, as something that emerged out of competition, out of proximity to danger, out of two species circling the same resources across the same freezing terrain. And if this is the kind of story you come here for, animal behavior, told all the way down, subscribe. We do this every week. The version of this story most people carry goes something like this. Somewhere in that distant past, early humans looked at wolves and recognized an opportunity. They captured the tamest individuals, kept the ones that didn't fight back, bred them towards something useful, and over many generations, the wolf became the dog. It's a satisfying story because it sounds like something humans would do. We are planners. We look at the natural world and find ways to shape it toward our purposes. The problem is that the evidence doesn't quite hold still for it. The earliest remains that archaeologists identify as proto-dogs appear before agriculture in multiple sites, before the kind of established settlements that would make systematic animal management possible. The timeline is still actively debated. But one thing the evidence keeps resisting is the idea of a clear, deliberate beginning, a moment when someone decided to make a dog, which opens a quieter possibility. What if no one started this? That matters, because it means the dog may not be something we invented. It may be something that found us first, and that changes the story almost entirely. At the edge of every early human settlement, there was waste. Not metaphorical waste, physical waste. Bones with scraps of meat still on them, carcasses left after the best portions were taken, the accumulated leavings of people who had hunted more than they could eat in a single night. Most wolves kept their distance. The smell of humans, the sound of human activity, these had meant danger across enough generations that proximity triggered flight before anything like deliberation could occur. But not every wolf had the same threshold for that response. Some individuals, for reasons that were probably partly genetic, could tolerate being closer to human activity without triggering into flight. They weren't friendlier. They weren't more trusting. They were simply wired with a slightly lower fear response to human presence. Those wolves ate better in lean winters. They survived conditions that killed others. They had more offspring, and their offspring inherited that slightly lower threshold. No human planned any of this. No pen, no breeding program, no deliberate hand at work. There was only proximity and scraps, and the slow arithmetic of survival repeated across hundreds of generations. The dog may have begun as a wolf that made a different calculation about risk. But here's what happens when you run that calculation for long enough. There is a detail buried in dog biology that tends to get overlooked in the more dramatic parts of this story. Dogs and wolves share almost identical digestive systems, with one significant exception. Dogs carry far more copies of a gene called AMY2B, which produces an enzyme that breaks down starch. Wolves, which evolved as strict carnivores, have very few copies. Dogs have multiple times more. Starch, grain, root vegetables, cooked plant material, would have been abundant near human settlements, especially as agriculture developed. A canid living at the edge of a human camp had access to an entirely different food source than one surviving purely on prey. The gene didn't appear because someone engineered it. It amplified across generations, in populations eating what humans left behind. The dog's body, at a molecular level, carries the record of thousands of years spent near human food. It's one thing to say dogs adapted behaviorally. It's another to find the adaptation written into the genome. But the physical changes go far deeper than digestion. And to understand that, you need a Soviet geneticist, a very large number of foxes, and a result that nobody anticipated. In the 1950s, Dmitry Belyaev began an experiment that would run for decades. He wasn't working with wolves. He was working with silver foxes, wild animals bred exclusively for their fur, with no selection pressure on temperament whatsoever. He selected for a single trait: which foxes showed the least fear response when a human approached. Not the most affectionate, not the most playful, simply the least afraid. Within a handful of generations, something appeared that no one had asked for. The foxes didn't just become calmer, they began to look different: floppy ears, curled tails, patchy coats with spots of white that don't appear in wild populations, muzzles that shorten slightly, and behaviors: whimpering, seeking contact, watching human faces for information that their wild counterparts simply don't display. Nobody selected for any of that. Belyaev only asked for one thing: less fear. But selecting against fear appeared to pull an entire cluster of changes along with it, in development, in hormonal timing, in the capacity to read another species. What this suggested was that domestication isn't a list of separate traits you engineer one by one. It's more like a threshold. Lower the fear response enough, and something much larger begins to shift. The wolves that drifted toward human settlements weren't just becoming calmer. They were becoming something that had never existed before. Now, stop for a moment and think about what that animal actually sounded like. Wolves don't really bark. Adult wolves howl, they growl, they whine in specific social contexts. But the sharp, repetitive, directed bark, the sound so synonymous with dogs that we use it as a verb in multiple languages, is almost entirely absent in wild wolves. Wolves bark occasionally, as puppies, in alarm. But the sustained, communicative barking that dogs do, at the door, at a stranger, at you specifically because you need to know something, that's a dog behavior. And it appears to have developed specifically as a signal aimed at humans. A dog doesn't bark to tell other dogs things. It barks to tell you things. The behavior evolved in the presence of humans, pointed at humans, calibrated for an audience that can't track what the dog is tracking, can't smell what the dog is smelling, can't hear the approach the dog registered 4 minutes ago. Think about the last time your dog barked at something you couldn't immediately see or hear. It was making a sound specifically designed for you, not for its own species, for yours. And the direction of that attention goes both ways. There is one thing dogs do that wolves, even wolves raised by humans from birth, almost never learn to do reliably. They follow a human's pointing gesture. When you point at something across the room, a dog looks where you're pointing. A wolf, in the same situation, tends to look at your hand. The dog reads the gesture as communicative information. The wolf reads it as a thing. This seems like a small difference. It isn't. Following another individual's gaze and gesture is called joint attention, the capacity to share a focus of awareness with another mind. In human infants, it emerges in the first year of life and underlies an enormous amount of social learning. It's how we signal not just objects, but intent. Dogs also read human emotional expressions. When researchers showed dogs photographs of human faces, happiness, anger, and paired those images with voices that either matched or contradicted the expression, dogs responded differently to the mismatches. A happy face with an angry voice produced visible confusion. They were integrating both signals simultaneously, the way a socially fluent creature reads the full picture rather than a single cue. Wolves, in comparable experiments, showed much weaker responses to human faces. They weren't wired to attend to them the same way. Something in the long overlap between these two species shaped a brain that pays close attention to what a human face is doing. Not because dogs were trained to, because across thousands of years, The animals that read human faces accurately made better decisions and survived better than the ones that didn't. When researchers looked at what happens between dogs and their owners during sustained mutual gaze, they found that oxytocin, associated with social bonding, rose in both. Not just in the human, in the dog too. The same neurochemical exchange that operates between human parents and infants appeared to be active across species lines. We don't fully understand why the chemistry runs in both directions, but the pattern keeps appearing. Two different nervous systems, two different sensory worlds, and somewhere across thousands of years of shared cold and shared fire, something in each one shaped itself around the other. The standard framing positions dogs as the primary beneficiaries of this arrangement. Humans had fire, shelter, and reliable food. Dogs traded their wildness for access to those things. The fossil and anthropological record offers something more complicated. Dogs appear alongside early humans in hunting contexts, in ecological situations where their sensory range complemented what human hunters lacked. Groups with dogs could detect approaching threats earlier. They could track wounded animals further into terrain that human senses couldn't navigate in darkness. In certain environments, the presence of dogs may have shifted survival odds enough to matter across generations. We don't know exactly how much. The evidence is suggestive rather than conclusive. But the pattern keeps appearing across sites. Wherever certain early human populations are found, dogs are often there too, not kept at a distance, but present, working, included. Neither species designed this from the outside. It assembled itself, slowly, because both sides had something the other lacked. But the strange thing about a bond this old is that once survival no longer controls it, human preference does. And human preference, it turns out, is not always kind. Somewhere in the last few centuries, accelerating sharply in the last 100 years, the co-evolution that had been driven by survival was redirected toward aesthetics. Dogs were bred not toward what worked, but toward what we wanted to look at. The results are well documented and sit uncomfortably beside the rest of this story. Skulls compressed until breathing became effortful, spines lengthened past structural integrity, skin folded into chronic infection, airways so restricted that sleeping through the night requires real physical effort, every night, for the animal's entire life. The same creature that walked out of the Ice Age by learning to navigate its own fear, that adapted its brain and its body across millennia of genuine mutual pressure, is now, in some breeds, struggling with the body we decided it should have. That doesn't cancel what came before, but it doesn't disappear from the story either. But there is one grave, found in Germany, that puts the whole story in a different kind of light. In a burial site near Bonn, archaeologists found remains from roughly 14,000 years ago. Two humans had been interred together, and alongside them, positioned with what appeared to be deliberate intention, were the remains of two dogs, or animals on the cusp of what we would recognize as dogs. One of the animals showed clear signs of severe illness. Its bones indicated it had been suffering from distemper, a disease that, at that stage, would have left the animal dependent, weakened, unable to hunt or contribute in any practical sense. And yet it had lived past the acute phase, past the point of obvious usefulness, past the point where keeping it alive made any logical sense at all. Someone had continued to care for it. It isn't the only site like this. Across multiple cultures and multiple continents, archaeologists keep finding the same pattern. Dogs buried with humans, sometimes with grave goods, sometimes positioned in ways that suggest they were placed with intention, not discarded, not left at the perimeter, included. This was 14,000 years ago, before agriculture, before permanent settlement in any recognizable form, before nearly everything we associate with civilization. We cannot know what those people felt. We have no language from that time, no record, no testimony beyond what the earth preserved. We only have what they did, and what they did looks, from the outside, like the decision to stay with something simply because you cannot imagine letting it go. The dog lying beside you right now has no access to any of this. It doesn't know about the Ice Age, or the scraps at the edge of a fire, or the slow genetic drift across thousands of generations that made it possible for the two of you to exist in the same room without either of you finding that strange. It just knows where you are, and something in it, something shaped by longer forces than either of you can feel, decided that being near you was worth the distance it crossed to get there. The grave near Bonn is in a museum now. The bones have been studied, catalogued, written about in papers with careful, measured language. But somewhere before all that, someone dug it, chose a depth, chose a position, chose not to leave the animal behind. Your dog is lying there. It has been lying there this whole time. That moment when your dog finally settles, when it stops adjusting and just goes still next to you, carries a longer history than it looks like. If this changed how you read that moment, leave a comment below. And tell me, when your dog first reaches you in a room, does it look at your face before it lies down, or does it just close its eyes?